Another one. You think it's just Clarence Thomas? No. Let's take a look at this pig, Neil Gorsuch. Mr. Smiley Man, Mr. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a womanizer. I'm just Mr. Smiley Neil Gorsuch. Of course, I'm a right-wing Christian fanatic, but I'm just Smiley Mr. Gorsuch. Well, according to Politico, for nearly 2 years, starting in 2015, Neil Gorsuch, this is before he was the Supreme Court, he tried to find a buyer for a 40-acre chunk of property that he co-owned in rural Granby, Colorado. And just try as he might, he couldn't find a buyer. Until about 9 days after he was confirmed by the Senate for a lifetime appointment on this corrupt Christian fascist Supreme Court. Well, Mr. Gorsuch, who was then a circuit court judge, he got a buyer. Ta-da! Somebody popped up out of the woodwork. And the person who bought it was the chief executive of Greenberg Traurig. That's one of the nation's biggest law firms. And they have a very, how's it referred to, a very robust practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. Gorsuch was one of 3 owners of this property. So, on April 16th, 2017, 9 days after he was confirmed to be a Supreme Court justice, a guy named Brian Duffy at the Greenberg firm put under contract this 3,000 square foot log home on the Colorado River, nestled in the mountains northwest of Denver. That's all according to real estate records as dug out by Politico. Don't you love Politico? So he and his wife, I'm talking about Brian Duffy, they closed on the house a month later and they paid just under $2 million, according to a deed in the county's record system. Gorsuch reported making about $500,000 from the sale. That's what he reported on his federal disclosure form. However, Mr. Gorsuch, even though the form demands this, did not disclose the identity of the purchaser. Oh, really? I wonder why. That little box that Gorsuch was supposed to fill in with the name and all sorts of pertinent information. I mean, he's a Supreme Court justice now. When the sale was made, or 9 days after he was confirmed, so you might as well say he was a Supreme Court justice, but he left that box blank. I'm not going to tell. And since that time, this law firm, Greenberg Traurig, has had at least 22 cases before or presented to the U.S. Supreme Court. No. Why? Mike, that's just a coincidence. It doesn't mean shit. Doesn't mean a thing. Move on. Let's not move on. According to Politico, these 22 include cases in which the Greenberg law firm either filed amicus briefs or actually represented parties who had business before the Supreme Court in 12 cases where Mr. Neil Gorsuch's opinion is recorded. He sided with Greenberg Traurig's clients 8 times and against them 4 times. In addition, a Denver-based lawyer for this law firm represented North Dakota in what became one of the most highly publicized rulings in recent years. That was a multi-state suit which wound up reversing former President Barack Obama's plan to fight climate change through the Clean Air Act. So Neil Gorsuch, in that case, he joined the other 5 neo-fascist judges on the court In agreeing with the plaintiffs in this case, which included Greenberg's client, that the Environmental Protection Agency had overstepped its authority by regulating carbon emissions from power plants, and that decision makes it more difficult for the executive branch to regulate emissions without express authorization from Congress. Well, Neil, you certainly earned your $500,000, you rotten son of a bitch, you, huh? All he had to do was just check the box and identify who bought his house, and then, dare I suggest this, recuse himself from any case involving, directly or indirectly, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. Greenberg Traurig. It's hard to pronounce. It's German, you know. But Mr. Gorsuch didn't do that, did he? Just kept it to himself. Now, the guy who, Brian Duffy, who bought the house along with his wife, in addition to serving as CEO of Greenberg's entire 600-lawyer litigation department, Mr. Duffy said he has never personally argued cases before Gorsuch or met the justice socially. Oh, well, that makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? In fact, Duffy said, according to Politico, Duffy said, quote, "I've never spoken to him. I've never met him." Oh, well, my goodness. And once he learned that Gorsuch was among the owners of this piece of property, Mr. Duffy said he cleared the sale with his firm's ethics department. Yeah, I'll bet you did. I'll bet you did, Mr. Duffy. What did you say to your ethics department? Hey, listen, I just bought a piece of property and one of the three owners is a Supreme Court justice. Is that okay? Yeah, it's okay, son. Don't worry about it. Well, then why didn't you check the box, Mr. Gorsuch? I mean, your buyer's law firm said it was okay. What are you trying to hide, Neil? Now, Politico, as they are wont to do, contacted the Supreme Court to try to get some information from Gorsuch about the sale. And, of course, Gorsuch ignored the request for information. And he ignored the question posed by Politico whether or not he, Gorsuch, should have disclosed this. And whether he should have reported Mr. Duffy's identity as the purchaser. Well, Neil Gorsuch, being a Supreme Court justice, he probably just, in his manner, raised the middle finger to Politico and went about his business of screwing anyone he could, which is what all six fascist Supreme Court justices do. Now, to be clear, the rules of the Supreme Court, as few as they are, do not prevent justices from engaging in financial transactions with people who have interest in court decisions, which I think is crazy. But Mr. Gorsuch's dealings with Mr. Duffy expose what Politico calls a weakness of the court's disclosure procedures. For instance, in reporting his Colorado income, that $500,000, Gorsuch listed as his source only the name that he and the other two owners gave themselves, and they called themselves the Walden Group, LLC. The report didn't indicate that there had been a real estate sale or a purchaser. Gorsuch just put down, $500,000 through a Walden Group, LLC. I'm not going to tell you where the money came from. Now, a sale like this, I think it goes without saying, would raise some ethical problems for officials serving in other branches of government. Huh? Remember the Whitewater deal? Little old land development deal in Arkansas that Hillary and Bill Clinton got involved in and never made a dime on it, but it wasn't disclosed properly. And look what happened to Bill Clinton. Woo! But you see, the Supreme Court sets its own rules. This shit just doesn't stop, does it, huh? And it seems like every day there's another reveal, as they say, another reveal about some kind of corruption of these Christian fascists. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.